Sure. Is every episode of this show going to be good? No, I can guarantee you they will not be. There's going to be a few where you're like, that episode, we don't talk about that episode. But you still come along for the ride.
In 2017, Universal Studios announced the birth of a new shared universe of monster movies, bringing their classic horror icons into the contemporary franchise film landscape. But after the critical and financial failure of its first installment, the project was indefinitely abandoned. Now, in 2024, the powers that be have called upon one pulp horror devotee and one snarky film critic to unearth the concept. I'm Dylan Roth.
And I'm Dalton DeShane.
Are you afraid of the dark universe?
Hello and welcome back, everybody, to Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe, the podcast where we attempt to resurrect Universal Studios' failed cinematic universe of monster movies, one pitch at a time. I am host prime, Dalton DeShane.
And I am host from Earth 1610, Dylan Roth.
Welcome back. This is our first episode of 2024.
The music has been updated.
Oh, yes. We've definitely updated the theme song
The
to
theme
say
song is up to
2024
date
now.
to say 2024 now.
I will make sure that happens. And we hope that you had a wonderful holidays and New Year's. Last time we were speaking to you was the Dark Universe Holiday Special.
Which, as we sit now, we are still in the middle of writing.
Yeah, we have sort of just started writing because we are pre-taping this because we have a very exciting guest pitch today. We heard from, of course, our lovely benefactors at Universal Studios. Of course, by this point in the Dark Universe, you know, we've had two of our major crossovers. This is at this point, I'm assuming $1 billion franchise.
Oh, at least.
They, of course, want to start expanding the Dark Universe, and that sometimes means licensing other properties. We've seen Universal do this before through Blumhouse, where they got the rights to Halloween to do the David Gordon Green trilogy, and then with The Exorcist to do another David Gordon Green trilogy. And we are now actually not us, but our guest today is the David Gordon Green of this particular franchise, because Universal's reached out to us and said they have inked an exciting partnership with Paramount for the rights to the property that we're going to be talking about today, on the condition that today's guest is in creative control over this merger. But let me introduce our guest today, and we can get into the specifics of this exciting pitch. Today's guest is the co-creator of the acclaimed podcast, Welcome to Night Vale. Is it co-creator or creator? Which?
Let's say co-creator.
Co-creator.
I made the first episode, but then Jeffrey came in and kind of everything after was both of us, so we go by co-creator these days.
Okay, co-creator of the acclaimed podcast, Welcome to Night Vale, as well as I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats, Alice Isn't Dead, and Unlicensed. He is also a New York Times best-selling author of books such as Alice Isn't Dead, The Halloween Moon, Welcome to Night Vale, It Devours, The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home, and The First 10 Years. I hope you have at least one or all of those books on your bookshelf, and you're a fan of this podcast, you probably do. Please welcome to the Dark Universe, Joseph Fink. Welcome to the Dark Legion, Joseph.
Hi there, and hello to my mom who listens to the show. Because I recommended
great.
it to her. So, hi, Mom.
Hello, Joseph's mom. Should we keep things clean, or she's
It's not
down?
going to happen
No,
regardless.
my mom won't care.
Okay, great. For listeners who may not be aware, Joseph tweeted some very kind things about the show recently, which took Dylan and I by total surprise. We had no idea you or your mom were a listener. And you mentioned on Twitter that you had been dying to give us a Teen Wolf pitch. I'm curious, how did you find the show, and what got you thinking about Teen Wolf in regards to our universe?
It's a great question, and I can't really remember. And here's why. I am subscribed to over 100 podcasts, because basically anytime I try to keep up with stuff. And so anytime I hear someone like a podcast, I will stick it in there and listen to one or two episodes. And a lot of them I get like 5 minutes in and I'm like, no, thank you. And then occasionally I run across one I really enjoy. And I genuinely do not remember. It was probably just someone on some social media site mentioned you and the idea sounded funny.
Well, thank you for giving us a
genuinely
shot.
probably the entire story.
And I have to say, the way that you talked about us online made us sound really cool, because you didn't say, hey, I've been listening to this obscure podcast, Dark Universe Pod, and here's what I have to say about it. You just opened with, the thing I like about Dark Universe Pod is, and then you gave some glowing praise of our show, and what that gets everybody else doing, being like, fuck, I haven't heard of that podcast. I have to know what this is. And it made us feel extremely cool. So thank you.
But the thing about podcasting is every podcast is in some way obscure. The example I always use is that last year, Obama and Springsteen made a podcast.
Yeah,
That's right.
Do you know anyone who listened to that?
I mean, I did, but
Did you really? Oh, well, you're a Springsteen
I'm a big
fan.
Bruce guy.
Well,
But
there
the thing
you
is,
go.
I actually
that ruins my entire example.
well, I mean, eventually I kind of fizzled out because I had listened to Bruce's autobiography like 3 times already. So I'm like, I'm not getting anything new out of him.
Oh, okay.
And
You're kind of a that guy with
I'm a Bruce guy.
He's from
Yeah.
Jersey. It's a biased sampling.
So is my wife, but my wife is like a Dave Matthews Band, New Jersey, not a Bruce Springsteen, New Jersey.
Okay, then.
That seems to be a bigger turf war than maybe even New Jersey and New York City. So we won't get into any fights right here, but yeah, like podcasting is so overcrowded. Like it's such a choose your own adventure kind of medium, you know. But we appreciate you taking the time. I assumed maybe it was Calvin that was maybe the overlap, because Calvin Kasulki, friend of the show, he pitched us the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and recently wrote an excellent episode of Welcome to Night Vale, The Truck Touchers, which is a very funny episode. I recommend everyone go listen to that one. But it's a pleasure to have you. And we really want to get into this Teen Wolf pitch. But first of all, Joseph, what is your history with the Universal monsters? When did you become aware of them? Have you been a fan of any adaptations or any of the originals?
I don't have a strong relationship with it. We did own the Bela Lugosi Dracula on VHS, which I watched, I would say probably quite a few times, because pretty much we didn't have a huge VHS collection. So anything we owned, I was going to be watching at least 10 to 15 times. And my parents mostly owned older movies. The number of times I watched Night of the Opera and Duck Soup by the Marx Brothers, I really genuinely can't count. It was probably over 50 each. She also, my mom was also very into 50s science fiction, so we had a ton of those. As a kid, I had strong opinions on which was better, It Came from Outer Space and It Conquered the World. For the record, if I remember right, It Came from Outer Space is significantly better, and It Conquered the World kind of sucked.
The original It franchise, yes.
But yeah, I think with the original Dracula, I was just very taken by the performance. Like, it's a really arresting performance, even when you're a 9-year-old in the 90s. It kind of reaches across that time. Other than that, I have not. I watched Young Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
I watched Gods and Monsters with Brendan Fraser. But never watched the movie that it's about. So I don't have a ton of relationship.
Because Gods and Monsters is mostly about Bride of Frankenstein, is that right?
Yeah, it's sort of about the guy who directed it years later. It's not really, it's not concurrent with the making of it.
Yeah, it's a James Whale sort of biopic with
Sir Ian McKellen.
As James Whale, yes. We're big James Whale fans here. At Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe, as you may imagine.
It's funny though that I think that you and I, Joseph, come to the horror world or of Universal Monsters by way of sci-fi as well. Like I'm that's also my entry point, as well as like I watched Young Frankenstein before I saw Frankenstein or Bride and Frankenstein.
I mean, I feel like I did too, because like my dad was a big Mel Brooks person. I didn't even see it. Like, I think you probably both have me beat on maybe seeing the Universal classic monster movies, because I didn't have them around growing up. I just kind of knew of them. But it wasn't until probably at least the streaming era that I actually got to see them, because we never had any on VHS or anything. Dylan, I don't remember when you first saw, if you've even talked about when you first saw one of the classics.
Well, like I know that I had seen them, as many people do, just being on television. I wasn't like a big late night TV watcher. I was too much of a good boy, and I went to bed when I was told. Then I started to actually get interested in taking them more seriously just in college in a horror films course where I was first introduced to the 31 Spanish Dracula, which blew my mind. But Teen Wolf is not from the Universal canon, even though it feels like it could easily be confused for one.
It was sort of like, I feel like in the 80s there were a lot of attempts to sort of revive that by brands that weren't Universal. There was also Monster Squad, which is not actually a Universal property, and a lot of these were like kind of aimed at kids. Like Teen Wolf is a very, very young movie. It feels like, at least. I mean, it's PG, but it feels like it's aimed at a younger audience because of how just kind of supremely silly it is, and how sort of devoid of horror. But we were actually talking before we started recording that the history of teenage werewolves actually goes all the way back to the 50s, which was the era you were watching these sci-fi movies in with I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which was part of a franchise of teenage monster movies that also included I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, as well as a few others. In the 50s, I guess, greaser monsters were probably very popular. Now, Joseph, you were telling us that you have not actually seen any Teen Wolf properties. Is that correct?
No, yeah, I came to this backwards. I came with what I wanted to do with it, and then Teen Wolf kind of was in my head as the thing. And as I was telling you, I was thinking of I Was a Teenage Werewolf because I was definitely thinking of like a 50s movie with like a werewolf in a like varsity jacket.
Yeah.
I think when I Googled it and discovered it was an 80s movie, that took me by total surprise, as well as the fact that there's been not one but two TV series adaptations of it. So we are coming at this at a bit of a disadvantage, as it has been done a couple times before. But I believe in our concept, and I believe that we can make it work.
I believe whatever we do is probably going to be unique. Also,
that's where we do a lot of our best work, is when there's something where it seems like it's been done enough times that we have to really take wild swings in our iteration in order to make it deserve to exist.
Yeah.
Case in point being your Invisible Man, Dalton.
This also opens us up to, if Paramount is being stingy about the pricing, we can just call it I Was a Teenage Werewolf and do the deal with Amazon instead. And either way, we end up with a teen werewolf franchise. I kind of like I Was a Teenage Werewolf as a title better anyway, like because of the sort of throwback 50s sound to it. So if we decide during the pitch that we just want to call it I Was a Teenage Werewolf, maybe that's the direction we go in.
It also just raises the question of, can you argue that no one has ownership over the concept of teenagers that are werewolves, and you just need to find a new way to say it?
Right. We would need to pick maybe we'll come across a title as we go.
Yes.
Were-teens. That's not it, but we're close.
Let's see.
Lycanthrope youngster. Young lycanthropes actually is not awful.
I was a pubescent werewolf. That probably hasn't been done before.
Got it in one.
There we go.
Yeah.
I was a pubescent werewolf. That is very catchy.
Now, Dalton and I did revisit the 1985 Michael J. Fox quote, classic end quote, Teen Wolf in preparation for the episode. So I feel like we should dip into it a little bit just to get an idea of what previous generations have done with the concept of what if there was a Teen Wolf?
Which you would expect the movie to maybe explore a little bit more than it actually does. If anyone has not seen the movie Teen Wolf, it is like a 1985 movie, I believe, with Michael J. Fox, fresh off the heels of Back to the Future. It is not a horror movie. It is not an action movie. It is not even a comedic pastiche of a horror or action movie. It is a basketball film.
Yeah, I mean, it's a coming-of-age movie where about a kid who he doesn't get bit by a werewolf. In this situation, being a werewolf is hereditary.
Yes, his father was a werewolf.
Yes, and so it kind of usually, it frequently plays as a metaphor, as werewolf stuff often does for coming of age, for puberty.
Mm-hmm.
But what's kind of confusing about the movie tonally is that at every turn, when it seems like him being a werewolf might be a problem, it turns out to just be great.
Yeah, there's basically no dramatic tension in the movie at all. Being a werewolf is really cool for this guy. He is worried about it for about a scene, and then he wolfs out on the basketball court and helps his terrible team win the game.
And everyone's just nuts about it. Like, all right, cool. Werewolf can hoop, so we're good.
Everyone's immediately accepting of him. He becomes the most popular guy in school.
And that becomes the real problem that he has to face, is that he gets to be so popular and so well regarded as Teen Wolf that he's like, has to try and rediscover himself as a human being.
Is it possible that Air Bud was like a stealth remake of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is basically Air Bud if the dog and the kid were the same character.
It really is. There's nothing in the rules that says a werewolf can't play basketball. Everyone is just kind of like, well, I guess we have to let this happen.
This is a separate pitch, but I do have a pitch for an Air Bud prequel that is just them coming up with the rule book, and they consider whether they need to ban butt dogs and decide that that isn't going to come up.
Yeah, we'll never need this. It's when I was filling out my my lease for this apartment, my landlord had never been a landlord before, and so she was kind of letting me dictate the terms of the lease. And we got to, she was like, there's a part in here about pet rent. Should I charge you pet rent? I was like, no, I don't think so. I don't think we'll need that. Knowing I was already about to adopt 2 cats. So yeah, it could be.
I love a landlord being like, "Should I charge you this?"
Yeah, I really liked it too.
We could
Did
really.
she expect you to say yeah?
It's behavior, honestly, we would like to see more from.
Yeah.
From the landlord community.
When the revolution comes, she will be spared for allowing me these pets at no additional fee.
So yeah, the issue that we have is kind of the second movie in a row that we're bringing in for the guest pitch. That's like, well, it's not really working from a horror place. It's kind of to us now to figure out. It's not too hard to figure out where the horror could come from. In fact, when Teen Wolf was officially revamped as a TV series for MTV in 2011, they went the more natural path of, oh no, I'm a teen wolf.
And they made it so that he was bitten by a werewolf. They got rid of what's very funny about the movie is that it starts when he's already having werewolf symptoms. There's no like initial, infection. The normal like inciting incident of most werewolf movies is the person being bit by a werewolf, as it was in our Wolfman. In this, he's already got it. So I was kind of like, I wonder what like the inciting incident of this movie is going to be. And it turns out being his dad opening the bathroom door and having the werewolf face. And you've seen the dad before. He's just a standard like schlubby Midwestern dad. And then he opens, he's like, I know, son, we have a lot to talk about. Let me tell you about our werewolf history. And then they don't get into it like really at all. It's just kind of like,
all you need to know is that the men in his family are werewolves usually. Sometimes it skips a generation. And that it can be actually kind of nice to be a werewolf. And that never really gets challenged over the course of the 90 minutes of the film. There's never a point at which it actually seems like being a werewolf is not all that. It's the fact that he is so popular for being a teen wolf is the only problem that this script presents, which is, oh no, everyone loves me so much as Teen Wolf. Have I maybe lost myself in this thing? Yeah.
And so then at the end, the big climax is they have the basketball championships, but he decides he does not want to win it as Teen Wolf. He wants to win it as himself. And
now the key here, though,
it's definitely what the crowds want to come to a Teen Wolf for is a guy.
Yes,
a teen.
the human basketball game in the climax.
But that's in the text, though. It's like, oh, everyone's bummed out that the Teen Wolf didn't show up to the game, especially since the team was absolute shit until Scott becomes a werewolf. But it turns out that the real message of this movie is that you were already good at basketball.
Yes.
Against all odds. I mean, we saw you play in the beginning, and you looked like you were terrible at basketball.
Turns out you were good.
Turns
and you just
out,
didn't know it.
All you needed to do was to win a lot of games and pick up a lot of momentums using a superpower, and then realize later, wait a minute, I was good at basketball all along. And then they win the championship.
What this movie posits is that inside of you are 2 wolves, one of which is a werewolf, and one of which is a regular guy who's really good at basketball. And the secret to happiness is to unlock both of those inside you. It's really not so much. I'm assuming that whatever direction you go in your pitch, which we are going to get to in a minute, it's going to be more of an interesting take than this one. What we're going to have to figure out is, are we going to work basketball into your pitch? Or are we going to work in the song Surfin' USA, which does occur in this movie twice? Because there are 2 different scenes of characters surfing on the top of a van. Joseph, I know you haven't seen this movie, and I don't know that I'm going to recommend that you see the whole thing, but you need to at least watch the scene where Michael J. Fox, as a werewolf, surfs on top of a van through the town and does about a dozen backflips. Just keeps backflipping over and over to Surfin' USA, and then just stands on his head. And it's one of the most baffling and goofiest scenes I've ever seen in a film. It adds, I mean, there's really, the movie is just a string of bits of just like, what if this teenage thing happened, but you were a werewolf for it. Except I never knew anyone that was surfing on top of vans personally.
The vibe I'm getting is like they just kind of they had to make it like they had the concept and maybe the ending, and then we're just kind of trying to. It reminded me of like I forget one of the Jackass movies. They bring like an actual celebrity on, and they're trying to figure out what to shoot with him. And he's like, "You guys shoot a movie like it's a pickup basketball game. Just like, who's here? Let's see what we can do." It kind of feels like maybe this was filmed the same way.
It really does feel like that. It feels like they had the barest outline, and then they were like, what's like a kind of, let's get some jocks in here. Let's have like a party scene, and his hands are hairy through it, and that's distressing to him for some reason. This movie, by the way, was written by Jeff Loeb.
Yeah, one of the most influential voices in comics for the following decade. This was one of two scripts from around this time period that he and his writing partner sold that ended up being big launch pads for 80s icons, because the other one was Commando. Those were Jeff Loeb's two big calling cards, after which he got recruited to do comics work.
Teen Wolf and Commando.
Yeah, pretty wild. Commando holds up better than this, I think.
This is the vibes in this movie are immaculate. It's just
it's a hangout movie.
It's a hangout movie. There's nothing going on. There is no story in which to speak of. As we mentioned, they then remade this very loosely as a TV show for MTV. There's also Teen Wolf 2. I don't know much about it.
That's Jason Bateman plays his cousin.
That's right. Jason Bateman is the werewolf in that one. I did know that. And then there's the MTV series. And then there was actually a Teen Wolf movie this year. They made a movie that ties into the MTV show that apparently everyone hates because they couldn't get the cast back for the MTV show. So I guess it's very loosely related, but also only for the fans of that show. And also it's 2.5 hours long somehow.
There's a story to be told.
Yes, that urgently needed to be told.
But the MTV Teen Wolf, it takes more of a dark fantasy angle. It definitely feels like it is descended from, I guess really feels like descended from Twilight. Like you have these, which was the hotness at the time.
Because this came out in 2011, so it would have been like peak Twilight time.
Where you have these factions of werewolves that are like kind of all living in this town. Granted, I only watched the pilot of this show.
And everyone's really hot, I bet.
Of course, yes. And this was pretty popular. I know that it was like the Tumblr show for a period of time. It was all over the post.
Interesting.
So we are challenged now, or you are, I should say, Joseph Fink, to come up with a new, never-before-seen interpretation of Teen Wolf that would be a good fit for our universe.
And I would say, why don't we head to a break? We're going to take it a little early so that when we come back, we can just dive straight into the pitch and workshop this and figure out how we're going to fit a Teen Wolf into our dark universe, possibly as a streaming series, as a movie. We don't know. It's Joseph Fink. Maybe this is a narrative podcast that he's about to pitch us. We have no idea. But when we come back, we will dive into the details of it. So stick around here on Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe?
Star Trek has never been just one thing. The ideas we associate with Trek are flexible, shifting and changing over time, depending on who is writing it, and even who is watching.
In this sense, then, Star Trek itself is a mirror universe. Or to put it another way, Star Trek's real mirror universe is our universe.
In the Star Trek Mirror Universe podcast, we reflect on Star Trek, the various and often conflicting things it's had to say, and the mirror it holds up to our world.
Star Trek, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder.
The Star Trek Mirror Universe podcast, with special guest star Dylan Roth, available on iTunes, Spotify, and all good podcatchers.
Live long and prosper.
And we'll see you on the flip side.
All right, welcome back to Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe? We are here with Joseph Fink, who is about to pitch us his take on some sort of teenage werewolf, definitely a minor of some kind. I don't know, junior high, high school, we'll find out. But Joseph Fink, listening to phase 1 of our show, what inspired you to think of the teenage werewolf aspect for your pitch?
Well, I was thinking about kind of the big obvious model of a cinematic universe that's happening right now. And comparing it to what's happening with yours, and I realized like the one thing that I felt I wasn't hearing was your Spider-Man.
Yeah.
That you kind of were missing the Spider-Man energy. Spider-Man is such a popular character, and I was like, it's not because of nobody cares that he's a spider guy or that he shoots webs. I was like, I think there's 3 things that make Spider-Man interesting every time, which is he's a teen. There's kind of that teen energy happening. He's really tied to a place. You know, Spider-Man is tied to New York City.
True.
It's a very New York City story. And at its best, Spider-Man is kind of low stakes. Spider-Man is, you know, he's your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Like, he solves neighborhood crimes.
Yeah.
I know that Marvel has now got him, like, fighting multiple universes, but I think that kind of sucks. I think that's, like, missing the point. And so I'm like, I want a character like that. I want a teen who's tied to a place and who has kind of much lower stakes adventures. And I definitely was thinking of like a TV series. I think I was in my head modeling it. You know, we were talking about the Teen Wolf that was modeled a little in the Twilight era. I'm a little older, so I'm thinking of like Buffy.
Sure.
But I think a similar vibe of like the adventures of the supernatural teen kind of model.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense because our Dark Universe has skewed older. You know, we've definitely our young aspect is our wolf people already, but they are in college and sort of then out of college once like sort of things happen.
They've had to go off on their own already.
Yeah.
Like their whole teenage experience is over by, 2/3 through the Wolfman.
Yeah, through the first movie. And then they're joined up with the Dark Legion. And then, we've got them on these sort of globe-trotting adventures. So that sort of robs them of also having that hometown, right? Because we've had them now in London. We're about to have them in Paris. We've had them, traveling the world with the Dark Legion. And so I agree that, we really haven't had any, we do have a teen character now from our Black Lagoon, but they're also on their own. They're very isolated from their community in the
and they're
movie.
constantly moving as well.
And they're constantly moving now. And so, and also I know you haven't heard our Black Lagoon episode, but Hunter was not having a good time. Like, it's not this sort of lighthearted. I don't know that your pitch is going to be lighthearted, but that's sort of like the youthful energy. Like, Hunter was depressed in that movie and needed to escape that town. It was very much a story of the oppression of being rejected by your community. So I think having something that has a little bit more fun, youthful energy and gives of course, our younger demographic an entryway into the Dark Universe, so they will keep spending that money for decades to come as they grow up on our Dark Universe, I think is a very smart move.
Yeah, so I was thinking, I don't think New York City is the move because you already have, Spider-Man, New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Los Angeles is a little too spread out.
Sure.
For a character like that. And so here's my pitch is that it's a Chicago show.
I like that.
This is a teen wolf in Chicago who solves Chicago problems. He's very involved in Chicago stuff. We get Chicago landmarks. You just get that vibe that this is a Chicago story.
Yeah.
So that's the first part of my pitch, I guess, is that this is a very localized story about a teen wolf specifically in Chicago solving neighborhood problems.
I think Chicago's a perfect fit because it does have the big city energy, but you've got a lot of more suburban or low-rise areas, a huge diversity in settings you can use there. And it's a place we haven't really touched in our Dark Universe yet.
That's true. We've been on the East Coast and the West Coast in the United States, and really not very much in between.
Yeah, so I think having a Midwestern monster is a good addition.
And it's a city that I think similar to New York. It's just, it's a city a lot of people love. I love Chicago.
Me too.
And so it's very easy to get good vibes about it. This is something I came up with kind of listening to you talk about Teen Wolf. I like the idea of his relationship with his dad, let's say.
Yeah.
So here's what I have now. This is something I came up with in the last 5 minutes.
That's how we do it.
So it's not fully thought through. But let's say that his dad is working to create a cure for werewolfism. Werewolf
Lycanthropy.
Yeah.
Lycanthropy. Maybe this is after our teen wolf has been bitten. Maybe it's before, and it's maybe he gets like bit by one of the test subjects. I'm not sure. But I think his father gives him the cure, and it does not, because I'm trying to solve a problem here, which is if your character's special power is to lose control completely and also disappear as an actor, neither of those things make great television. And so I think if the cure doesn't fully work, but allows him to keep enough of himself that maybe he just gets like cool yellow eyes or something and super strength, but like still has some control. And then you can also set up an ongoing conflict if these newfound abilities that come with being a werewolf under the control of this cure allows him to start helping people and start, being your friendly neighborhood werewolf, your friendly neighborhood teen wolf. Where meanwhile his father wants to fully cure him, which maybe he doesn't want.
Yeah, I think that works really well because right now our werewolves we've talked about on air go full wolf mode. Like they are not speaking, they are driven purely by instinct. And Teen Wolf as a movie, he is very much himself still. Like he grows a lot of hair.
And he becomes super strong and super agile, but otherwise he's still just this, he's just unassuming teen.
And so that's a cool aspect of that to keep, I think.
I think we also have the ability to tie in some stuff from our existing mythology here.
Absolutely.
Which is that in Werewolves of London, and we haven't heard about it since, in Phase 2's Werewolves of London, we introduced the idea of a serum that helps you to control your werewolf symptoms. Now, in that case, it basically is you take this dose and you're just not a werewolf for the next 36 hours or whatever. Which means you're also vulnerable to getting killed by regular mortal means. But that just means that we have that's the breakthrough, right? We have a juice that makes you go full wolf without the moon, and you got a juice that keeps you human. Now, maybe what we have here is someone experimenting with the idea of like messing with the two of them together and or microdosing the serum so that they're always a little bit wolf all the time.
And I mean, I think the because this is in Chicago, which is not a place we've had any characters before, but we still do want to, tie it to the larger universe in a way that is not going to be alienating to new fans, but still makes it firmly a Dark Universe project. I think the obvious answer here, and maybe we can find something better, but is that the dad works for Prodigium, right? At the end of Werewolves of London, that serum is handed off to Jennifer Halsey, who I would say probably hands it over to Prodigium maybe for research. And maybe the Teen Wolf's dad is part of their research division. And working with wolves, trying to splice DNA, working with the serum that we have the serum that makes you go full wolf. We have the serum that makes you not be a wolf. He's trying to synthesize these, see what kind of things he can come up with. And somehow something gets loose, bites his son. We have our Peter Parker radioactive spider incident. But I think that fits in very cleanly with the werewolf lore we've already established. And it actually helps us pick up on a cliffhanger that hasn't yet been resolved.
I like this because it also sets up an ongoing antagonist, because now I'm thinking that maybe he's the first person that it's actually worked on, even though it happened to him accidentally.
Yeah.
And so he's really wanted by this organization, but his father has to hide him. He has to hide himself. So there's kind of this ongoing throughout the entire series threat that he's like the thing they're looking for, because he's the first test subject that fully is able to have the benefits of being a werewolf without the downsides.
Which is also a very superhero thing, right? Like Captain America's blood holding the secret to the super soldier serum, or the Hulk, it
makes the character makes the character himself. I mean, Danny Phantom, same kind of thing, right? It's very common thing where if the villains got their hands on the hero, that in itself, it's not that the hero has to intervene in the plans of the villains all the time. The villains have a motivation beyond your simple revenge to go after the hero. Your blood is the key to something we need to weaponize being a werewolf, or to, neuter the danger of werewolves who are beyond our control.
And it makes our protagonist special, that he's the only one. So we don't end up having, 30 Teen Wolves running around by the end of season 2. And it also gives us a chance to make Prodigium the enemy again, which for a long time in our, we try to keep them at a distance, as we've talked about, but like they've sort of been our ambivalent, sometimes neutral, sometimes kind of on the bad side. But I like the idea of an entire project where Prodigium sort of is the enemy. And they are just full on villain mode because they just want this kid no matter what, because they need to figure out, the secrets of his blood. And then he can also, I'm sure, deal with other supernatural things, your monsters of the week in Chicago, but then having your sort of lore episodes, X-Files style, be about the Prodigium sort of hunting him, right?
Yeah, I mean, in my ideal world, this is much less the model of the like Disney Plus six episode miniseries. This is more like in an ideal world, this is the kind of show that goes 10 seasons and 200 episodes and has like 3 different casts that slowly replace themselves.
Yeah.
Like, I think this is the kind of model of just like a show that by the end of it, there's also like a teen mummy and a teen vampire.
Yes.
You get eventually like a whole cast of teen monsters.
We get our young
This
Avengers.
is sort of the vision.
Yeah, I like that. And also, like, it feels like in sort of in tradition of, you mentioned Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but that sort of, whether we think about it or not, Buffy is sort of the blueprint for the Arrowverse in that way as well, where you start with one hero and a supporting cast, and as time goes on, this cast balloons into, okay, well, now this is about a super team.
Yeah.
And they're facing higher stakes. And we have to make sure to make it not like The Flash, and that the solution to every problem is just to have our character learn how to run a little bit faster. You need to become slightly more wolf each time. And you have to be more wolf than you've ever been before.
Your sense of smell needs to be just a little bit sharper. Also, in the Buffy style, we get a couple seasons in high school. Then, of course, Teen Wolf goes to college.
And then I guess the show should end like on like Teen Wolf's 20th birthday. Because now you're just wolf.
Or we either change to post-pubescent wolf. I was a post-pubescent wolf, or we get a new teen wolf. The serum is passed down, like you said, like you're replacing Cass. We get a new younger wolf. We get our Miles Morales wolf. After once our teen wolf grows up, and
maybe we even fucking kill original Teen Wolf.
We could
be shocking.
We don't need to plan.
Yeah, you can do the full Buffy where you like kill Teen Wolf and then just keep the show going.
Yeah. And
except for in this case, we know Teen Wolf went to hell. There's no misunderstanding here.
Teen Wolf went to hell, and he's still there. We keep him there. So let's what's our pilot going to be? I feel like we obviously don't need to map 10 seasons of a TV show. I like the idea that
no, let's fucking do it. I'm here.
Yeah, we've only been going for about 30 minutes. Let's put on a pot of coffee and do and get a whole series map going. But let's first of all, I think this is always a challenge for me because I feel like I don't know any young actors. But do we have any ideas for casting of the Teen Wolf?
Yeah, this is always like I do occasionally do like actual TV pitches, and you're supposed to show like examples of actors, and anytime there's anyone under the age of like 25, I'm like, I don't fucking know anyone under 25.
It's the same, yeah.
I mean, I've been saying it could be her.
Yeah.
I have no, I think, image of this character yet.
Teen Wolf is gender neutral.
That's true.
So we could go woke. We could go woke and have a lady Teen Wolf.
The thing is that we already have a young teenage wolf woman. I mean, she's in her 20s now.
That's true. And she's our sole surviving werewolf.
Yes. So we need, I feel like it could go either way. Either it's like, okay, no one would bat an eye if we had 2 male werewolf main characters. No one would be like, oh, what, you already have a guy. Why would you have a second guy?
That's true.
So by that logic, be like, well, if we feel like having having Teen Wolf be a teenage girl, there's no reason not to do that.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm just doing the normal thing of Googling male teen actors.
I hope you're using a private browsing window and a VPN.
Well, like, what's the type are you thinking? It's like, so it's like Michael J. Fox is the lead in the original and in Teen Wolf 85, and his whole thing is, being his sort of like, I'm small, I'm unassuming, I don't know I'm hot. Like that's kind of his energy. Do we want to go with that, or do we want to do something different?
Is this going to be like nerd? Like Peter Parker's like a nerd, right? Are we going to do like someone who's maybe not popular in school?
I'm awful at basketball, but we have to change. Are we going to have a sports element?
That's true.
Well, the sports element is interesting because I do kind of want to go a different direction because it's such a classic thing of like the nerd who gets powers. It would be kind of interesting if maybe he's an okay basketball player.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he's a basketball star, but he's on the basketball team, and maybe you can get into some fun discussion of the ethics of continuing to be on the basketball team. Like, are you essentially juicing if you have werewolf powers and you do?
I'm kind of thinking now about the idea of a female teen wolf because, as we talked about, a lot of these teenage werewolf things uses lycanthropy as this sort of puberty metaphor, but it's always a puberty metaphor from a male perspective. And outside of like maybe Ginger Snaps, I was
about to say like the main werewolf story I know is Ginger Snaps, which is not that.
Yeah, and so which I think I haven't seen in a long time, but is mostly a queer sort of metaphor, right? If I remember right.
I think it's pulling double duty in that movie, both as just adolescence and coming out.
But if we did a younger female teen wolf and sort of keep the sort of coming of age puberty metaphor, I feel like that's an angle that maybe freshens it up a little bit, where we're not just doing, a male jock, learning his body, but like a young woman, it might be a new take on it.
To go right back in the other direction. One actor that did immediately just jump to my head is, do you all watch Reservation Dogs?
Yes.
The guy that plays Bear, I think could be interesting.
I think that's very interesting. I was just about to cast him in my next werewolf movie, but
okay.
No, you are you are beating me by 2 weeks, so you are allowed to claim him. I think Bear is a great pick.
He's super charming. He's has experience being on a TV show.
Yes.
DeFaro, Misco. Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna fuck it up.
DeFaro is his first name,
yes.
Right? Yeah, he's really great. But honestly, I could see almost anyone on that show.
Yeah, I was gonna say the woman who plays Alora, but I looked her up last night because she directed an episode, and I was like, wow, that's so exciting. She gets to direct an episode so young. She's 30. So she's maybe past the point of playing Teen Wolf.
How old is DeFaro?
DeFaro Wunatai is 22. That's definitely workable for a teenager on a television show. That was
about how old the guy who played Xander was when Buffy started, which is why he really started looking his age.
Yeah.
Towards the end, you're like, that man is 40.
The funniest thing is when you realize that when they launched, they had Smallville on TV, and Superman Returns came out during the run of Smallville. And Smallville was about a teenage Clark Kent, and Brendan Routh was supposed to be playing an adult, like in his 30s Superman. And Tom Welling, the Clark Kent of Smallville, significantly older than Brendan Routh.
So here's the question then that brings up. If we go with DeFaro, obviously a native actor, and we currently have Gwen Conliffe is our Native American Amber Midthunder werewolf and is about to star in our next movie coming out in 2 weeks, A Native American Werewolf in Paris. Because her native identity is so important, I think, to her character, and I assuming it would be for DeFaro as well. Do we do the thing of having these characters be related, or is that now kind of problematic to say, oh, all these Native American characters have to be related, But we do have 2 Native American werewolves existing in the same universe. Do we give them a connection or not? And maybe his thing is he's just moved to Chicago from their town in Talbot, California. He's part of the Conliffe family, and finds himself in a similar
circumstance. It does provide another link to your universe.
Yes.
That's easy. It provides like she could come in for a guest spot.
We could definitely have some guest spots.
It's always great in the first season if you have some famous people drop by.
True. I mean, that's like the thing in comics, right? Is when you introduce a new character, like
Wolverine has to show up.
Wolverine or Spider-Man has to show up in like the 3rd issue, to bring people to the series. So that does give us a link. Yeah, is that we could have Gwen show up and give him some like mentoring on being a werewolf, a training sequence, as she shows him how to use his powers or whatever. What do you think, Dylan? What are you thinking?
I think
you're our werewolf.
well, no, the
map
werewolves.
maker so
the
far.
werewolves are now in your umbrella for phase 3.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, in its difficulty of it just being the three of us in the room, if there becomes a point where we are over associating being a werewolf with being like from like First Nations, is that become?
I did have this thought.
Does that
Yeah.
make it weird at a certain point?
I think if you made them related, you're kind of playing with this character as part of her family. But there is a thing, if your two big werewolves are both native, you're kind of putting this like, are you associating like turning into an animal too closely with this one identity? I do think if they're related, you're maybe not saying that as clearly, because it's not like it's two entirely different people who just happen to have the same identity who have this, but it is something for you. I think this is very much something for you guys to consider. I don't think I can make that call.
Yeah.
Sure. Are we about to basically do a She-Hulk thing where Gwen accidentally makes her cousin a werewolf?
Here's what I would say. I would say, as much as I really like the casting of Bear, between the plans I have for Native American Werewolf, which are going to deal with a lot of these things, and as you pointed out, like the sort of basically, when I was doing research for Native American Werewolf, I did some research on, like, you know, obviously these the native folklore of like skinwalkers and shapeshifters and things like that. And everything I saw was basically like, hey, white people, don't touch this. Like, do not, like, these are not your stories to tell. It's always done. And so I was like, great, I'm not going to touch any of that aspect. But I do feel like, yes, if we start maybe going in this direction, it would. Obviously, these aren't real movies, so it's also not really a real problem to come up with. But I would say maybe we end up going a different direction for our Teen Wolf.
It's almost
just
a shame,
to keep
though,
it
because
separate.
it's a bummer when that kind of concern has to be an obstacle towards casting an actor that we like because we like the actor. Like, Amber Midthunder is my wolf woman because I had just watched Prey, and I was like, that's a movie star, and I want her in my movie.
Here's the thing, though. DeFaro's getting cast no matter what, because like I said, I do have plans for him.
I mean, he is very, like, he's got that TV lead look. He's very charming.
Yeah.
I think he'd do a good job. I think obviously there's other ways. We're also working with the pool of teen actors I'm aware of, and I have a 2-year-old, so I just don't watch that much TV at the moment.
We're also, I think,
and so it's a very small pool.
We're also, I think, getting bogged down in a very complicated conversation about culture and identity when we could just be mapping out what our Teen Wolf series looks like.
Yeah.
So why don't we?
I think we've said enough about that for now.
We can table this.
Let us know what
it.
you think, especially if this is an identity that applies to you and you feel like you have the authority to make a call. Obviously, no group is a monolith, but we'd be interested in hearing what you have to say. So hit us up on social media at Dark Universe Pod on Twitter or Instagram and Blue Sky, or send us an email at darkuniversepod@gmail.com.
In the meantime, let's get back to our sort of setup here. So we've got our Teen Wolf, and it sounds like we do like the idea of keeping him as a sports player. As
I think that's an interesting twist.
Yeah.
It gets us away from the like nerd turned power. You know, like Buffy was a cheerleader, and that was kind of. I think that's an interesting journey too. Is rather than the nerd who gains power, it's the popular person who becomes an outcast because they get power.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit still in the vein of what the Michael J. Fox one, except instead of him becoming a wolf and becoming popular, if we just have him have his status in high school is like totally normal. He's maybe not like the coolest guy in school, but like everyone likes him. Like he doesn't have any enemies. He's not getting bullied, but suddenly these powers, and it's sort of the, you know, the Peter Miles thing where like he's constantly being pulled away from school and his friends, and maybe we should talk about his friends. Who's our supporting cast going to be? Are we going to have some a Genki who, you know, sort of knows his secret and helps him out?
Well, the original movie gives us a small supporting cast of, we have Styles, who is his like sort of goofy troublemaker friend.
The most annoying character ever written in any film. Just awful and insufferable.
He has a different snotty like catchphrase t-shirt for every day of the week.
Yeah.
Then there is Boof, who is the girl next door character who is in love with our
keeping
lead.
the name.
Her name is Boof.
Yeah, no, that's in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we have to keep that. Yeah.
Yes.
It carries a different meaning now, maybe, than it did in 1985.
But she's the girl next door who has a thing for our teen wolf, but she loved him before he was a wolf, and his eye has wandered towards the unattainable cheerleader who will only be interested in him because he's the teen wolf.
So maybe a cool reversal here is that our teen wolf is already dating the cool cheerleader when the series starts, but then we have Boof, who is like the, is sort of our like nerdy goth, like knows all the shit about vampires. Like, especially if this is taking place after Mummy's Hand, she knows about the Dark Legion. Like she's like a huge fan. She loves monsters. And so our popular kid is drawn to her because she knows what's going on with him. And that takes him away from his cheerleader girlfriend. And he gradually, over the course of our first season, has a will they, won't they thing with the sort of dorky library goth girl. Or is that a little too cliche?
I have a slightly alternate pitch. I do think immediately when you were like group of people, the like neighbor girl makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of classic for this kind of thing. But I think the theme of this show is about learning to become active in your community and help people in your community.
Sure.
Like, I think that's something maybe he was never thinking about. Like, he's this popular basketball guy. It's not something he thinks about. And maybe she is somebody who is very active in her community. She goes to protests. She's very active in like activist stuff. And she's always kind of trying to get him to do that stuff. And so when he gets, I think the larger arc of the pilot is him getting, this werewolf ability, at first seeing it as purely a problem, but then through her learning, but there's an opportunity here to help people. Like, it ends, I think the end of our pilot ends with him realizing through her, hey, I now have the ability to help people. And so that maybe gives me an obligation to do that.
An idea maybe I had as you were talking about that is I really like the idea of her being very involved in the community, and maybe maybe it's even like a small twist at the end of episode 1 or 2 or something, where we know that she's involved, she's volunteering, she's doing the protests and stuff. And we also know that she's very involved in the local food bank. And maybe as our teen wolf is sort of learning this initial lesson of like, oh, do I need to really support my community? He finds out that she doesn't just volunteer there. Her family like needs that food bank. Like maybe they're very poor. Her father got laid off, or something like that. Single parent household, they're barely hanging on. And she's like working to support them and stuff. And so, and our teen wolf hasn't known someone like that before. Maybe our teen wolf is a little more privileged and has this realization like, oh, you're not just involved in the community, you depend on your community. And so the people I need to help are sort of the people, like you, or the people that there are people I care about that I can do more for now. And her being in that position sort of drives that home for him. Yeah,
I think the thing to keep in mind, the bigger vision with the show always, is that this is a show about solving neighborhood problems, even if those neighborhood problems are like a portal to hell. Like, it should be a portal to hell that threatens the neighborhood, not the world.
Yeah.
And so I like that using that to focus that in.
Yeah. And I like that it also feels a piece with what we're doing with what we've done with the werewolves in the past, like the Wolfman being sort of a story about understanding class. And like you have sort of now in our lead, we have kind of a new take on like Larry Talbot, whereas it's somebody who's a high status character who has to learn to take a more serious look at his world. And then rather than having a superpowered counterpart who starts from a place of less power and becomes more powerful, we have somebody who needs his help, and who is highly motivated to distribute that help to other people, to share, to try and get him to share his gift. So I think it feels, thematically totally compatible with the rest of our werewolf mythology.
Yeah, and so what we end up here is it seems like we're kind of making a new Scooby Gang, right? Where maybe his friends are all going to know the secret, and we'll keep Boof, obviously, we've sort of talked through her, but maybe also his friend Styles ends up being like our Xander, right? Who is sort of like
or maybe more like the Cordelia, because he's just about the good time, and he's kind of empty-headed.
A little more aloof, yeah. And then
you definitely could have some interest with like people from different worlds, kind of the world of his new life and the world of his old life trying to get along.
Yeah, like Styles and Boof could have maybe some tension between them, because they've never gotten along in school, but now they both have their link to our Teen Wolf, who maybe we just keep that as, what was his name? It was Eric. There's in the original movie What's
is
Teen Wolf's name.
Teen Wolf is Scott.
That's right.
His best friend is Styles, and he has the friend who's kind of afraid of Teen Wolf. This is Lewis. There's the girl next door, Boof, and then the cheerleader Pamela, who I guess in this case begins the story as Scott's girlfriend.
I think so. Yeah, so we have we'll just stick to the trio for now. We can have a trio of Scott, Styles, and Boof as sort of like our core Scooby gang, right?
Yeah. And then the antagonist they have to kind of work around all the time. Not necessarily the villain of the show, but someone who is their biggest obstacle is Scott's dad, who works for Prodigium and is always like sort of on the same case that they're on, but they have to try to make sure that they solve it without him knowing they're involved because he'll out them.
Or is it, as I think, Joseph, you mentioned earlier, maybe Scott's dad is trying to protect them from the company he works for?
I think I like your version better, where they have to like hide it from him, and he's working. But I also think that you want to make that dynamic interesting by making him otherwise a good father.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
Scott loves.
Yeah.
Like have that be a close relationship. Otherwise.
Well, I'm thinking about like Noah, the man with the horn-rimmed glasses in the first season of Heroes, where he is framed as the villain for much of the first season. And then you get that episode where we kind of reveal what the story has been like for him on his side, where he knows his daughter's secret and he's trying to protect her the whole time.
Well, but in this case, he wouldn't know,
He would
right?
know. But what I mean is, we have a moment where we get to, in the second season of that show or in the second season of our show, change the context of the relationship. So in the beginning, for our first status quo of the first season or the first half of the first season, it's we have to make sure your dad doesn't find out because he's going to freak out and he's going to have to report on us to the boss. And then you get to tell a bunch of stories in that status quo. And then when you finally flip that, then he gets to maybe play a different role where now his job is both to maintain his cover inside of this company and also protect his son at the same time. That gives us road to go.
It feels like
down.
it could be like a season cliffhanger kind of thing, is his dad finding out.
Yeah, when Joyce finds out Buffy's the Slayer, it's a huge deal.
Yeah, so we save that as big end of season reveal. And then I think, as you said, over time, we also introduce some other teen monsters that probably enter by way of Prodigium, or I think it would be interesting if we have sort of the dual big bads, right? We have our sort of organizational big bad, which is Prodigium, who I think we probably sort of humanize in a single person, right? Like the head of the Chicago Prodigium division, who is ruthless, right? He's sort of the opposite of Scott's dad, who Scott's dad is working for the company, but like is a good father, doesn't wish any harm on anybody. He's just doing research. But then there's the head of the division who's like, there's a teen wolf in these streets and we need to find him. But then also maybe we deal with a ongoing supernatural arc in the neighborhood, sort of like a Buffy Hellmouth kind of thing. And then the two collide in the season finale, right? We have the head of our supernatural arc that we've been building towards, as well as Scott's dad finds out, and the head of Prodigium is on their tail, and all these storylines kind of collide in our finale, right?
Yeah, and you can use, similar to how Buffy used the Hellmouth to kind of explain why all of this was happening in one little town, you can kind of use the fact that Prodigium has headquarters there or some sort of lab there as why these things keep happening. And also eventually, I do think you get some other teen monsters, but an issue I have is that I don't think, at least as far as I've listened, the mummy has that many cool powers other than one really powerful one that he can't use that much.
Yeah.
But I do really love the idea of teen mummy.
Yes.
So I do wonder if eventually Boof gets like infected with the mummy thing and becomes teen mummy.
Or is teen mummy maybe like an actual dead person who gets revived and joins the gang? Like,
right. So not somebody who has the powers that like Nick Morton has when possessed by Set, but someone who has the power of, well, I'm a rotting corpse that's walking around. Try and stop me.
Yeah, like they, through some accident in one of our Monster of the Week episodes, they end up like exhuming a really old corpse of someone who died as a teenager. And through some like magical accident, he gets revived. And they're like, shit, we didn't mean to do that. But what are we going to do? Kill him again?
Yeah, we're
we can't
responsible
do that.
for you now.
Yeah, like we can't kill you now that we've given you life. I guess this corpse is now just part of our gang.
Welcome,
I love
Jeff.
this because it's Chicago. You can make him like Prohibition era.
Oh, I
mummy.
love that. That's a really fun way to work in some local history and flavor, and to make the idea of a teenager from an age before teenager was really a defined thing. I think that's interesting because we think of like the term teenager or like the cultural identity of being a teenager is a post-depression phenomenon. It's a post-World War II phenomenon. So someone who the whole idea of a youth culture.
This guy's like, you don't have jobs? You're not down at the factory?
Yeah.
At 7 a.m. every morning? You still have all your fingers? What is this crazy
Why is the
future?
air so clean?
Oh,
Yes.
I think then that teen mummy died in like an industrial accident.
Sure, yeah. Like he literally died on the job in like an unsafe working condition.
And now you're setting up a fun dynamic between him and Boof, because Boof would be like trying to explain the structural conditions that led to his death. And he would not be, his head would not be there at all.
I love that we have a time. Yeah, like the whole like fish out of water guy now who like she's trying to explain like progressive politics to him and like, yeah, like the labor movement.
And he's still just kind of trying to get used to the idea of like women voting.
Yes, right.
Oh, maybe not that old, but.
And Boof maybe at some point could become our teen vampire.
That's the other classic I thought of.
Yeah.
You'd have to think of like a way that, do you have good vampires yet? Has that happened?
Well, what we've established basically, I mean, as it stands right now, we know that there is another family of vampires out there somewhere keeping the bloodline alive. But the way that I've always kind of thought of it in working with characters like Rita Talbot is that becoming a vampire, it's not like Buffy where you lose your soul. It's the act of sustaining yourself as a vampire, much like, like once you become a billionaire, it becomes very hard to justify not doing evil because you can get away with it. So I don't think becoming a vampire makes you evil. It just makes it like, well, I drink blood and I live forever, so there are really no consequences.
And you have
to me.
that hunger, right?
Yeah, and you have that hunger
is constantly
like,
driving you towards.
Like
it.
it's a condition that makes doing evil sort of a necessity or a convenience for you, but it doesn't make you evil necessarily. I think you could do the angel thing.
Yeah,
I like it.
I was also thinking, Joseph, I know you're not going to know this as much, but in our Black Lagoon pitch, we have this teen character, Hunter, who is the guardian of our Black Lagoon. And the Black Lagoon is sort of a metaphysical space that changes locations very frequently. And I think a really fun crossover we could do, maybe in like a season 2, is the Black Lagoon shows up in Chicago. Right. And we end up with this cool crossover where Hunter, for like maybe a 4-episode arc or something, joins our gang because Hunter is a teenager, a non-binary teenager. And they have a big, it basically turns into like a sort of mini Black Lagoon movie, but like sort of with a Young Avengers flair where it's like more of a teen adventure with dealing with the Black Lagoon, and then allows Hunter to have a very direct connection. And maybe when we play with like Hunter kind of wants to stay with them. Like,
right.
And
Hunter does not have friends their own age very much.
Hunter finally makes some friends who know what they're going through and who are also, monsters. Not that Hunter's a monster, but like is in this world. But Hunter, at the end of the day, is forced to follow the Black Lagoon wherever it goes. But I think that would be a very fun way of weaving our Dark Legion in, as well as maybe getting Gwen in there at some point too. I think we could definitely like Gwen being like the mentor werewolf at some point in season 1. Maybe like every season we have a different Dark Legion character.
Yeah,
kind of have a small
mini arc.
Yeah.
That's sort of the beauty of like, this is going to be running for 10 to 12 years
Absolutely.
while your movies are coming out. So you'll have plenty of time to have like the different characters or plot lines kind of intersect, but not in a way that the audience who are just big Teen Wolf people will get confused.
Yes. We'll explain their deal so you don't have to catch up on everything. And of course this will have spin-offs as well. We'll need the Boof Diaries,
I mean, I think Teen Mummy is really set up to like Teen Mummy maybe decides to make something of himself, moves to like, I don't know, London, Seattle.
I like the idea of Teen Mummy in Vegas.
I like the idea of half of it takes place in the present, and half of it takes place in the Prohibition era when he was alive. Sort of like Lost flashbacks. There's a sort of frame story that's taking him back to when he was still young.
I think maybe he revives one of his friends, and the two of them have like a thing they need to take care of. It's like unresolved business from all that time ago.
Yeah.
Now we're plotting out the spinoff. It's gone a little off the rails.
So maybe the whole graveyard gets revived, and so it's not just his friend but also all the people that did them wrong, like the boss of the factory where they died, and they're like on a revenge mission. Like this mummy can't still be alive because he was evil to us when we were alive.
That would differentiate it from Teen Wolf as well, where it's a show where they have a specific objective, which is we need to put all of these mummies back in the ground. And that could take them on the road places. And then we would have the structure for your flashbacks, because the flashbacks for this episode are showing the transgression that led this, or like, how did this character die? How does their death relate to our teen mummy? So you get to do that week after week. And you get to do a little bit of a My Name is Earl, the Mummy edition.
Or the, what is it, 100 Good Deeds for Eddie McDowd or whatever, where we've got a list to get through and we've got a lot of episodes to hunt them down. There we go. This is a franchise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of show I'm looking to make. It's the kind of show that, like, you like have never heard of it, and then you look at it, and it's like, this thing has 120 episodes, and I've never heard of the show.
And the kind of show that will keep paying us for decades to come.
Yeah, they just don't let you make shows like this anymore. They're like, we'll give you 6 episodes. Good luck.
Well, maybe the new writer's deal helps protect us a little more.
Because people love this. People want to watch.
Yeah.
Sure. Is every episode of this show going to be good? No, I can guarantee you they will not be. There's going to be a few where you're like, that episode, we don't talk about that episode. But you still come along for the ride.
Yeah, you end up loving the characters.
Yeah, the point, the thing that's like lost sometimes in the serialized like novel for television era is the hangout portion, which would be very true to the 85 Teen Wolf, where even though we might not find these characters terribly likable, the idea is you just want to spend time every week with these characters, watch them go on adventures, and it doesn't have to be massive stakes all the time. But as it is with Buffy, like those Monster of the Week stories, the characters still progress. Things are still happening, right? There is the soap opera element, the teen soap opera element, which you have to maintain. And like maybe we're still looking at a lighter tone, but the idea that like we're going to meet up with them every week. They're going to go on a mid-stakes adventure, and they can be doing them all the time. It's very open-ended, this one.
And I think some episodes can just be high school stakes, right? With them dealing with something like, class president election or something. And I like the idea of like an episode where we just keep it to the high school stuff, and like Teen Wolf has to keep going off to like fight monsters or something, but we don't follow him. We're only following the high school side of things and like keeping all the monster stuff off screen for an episode. Like we can take formal experiments because that's the luxury, right, of the 20 episode 10 season thing, is that you can just try
eventually you do the musical episode, you do the body swap episode.
Yeah, you get to luxuriate the status quo.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah.
I have an episode where Teen Mummy, they get in trouble with the what's the word I'm looking for? Not probation. when you don't go to school.
Oh, truant officer.
They get in trouble with the truancy officer because there's this teen not going to school, and so they have to take Teen Mummy to school and like try to get him to fit in.
That's perfect. Yeah, like covering him up, so people don't see how fucked up he is. I also, what our backdoor pilot for Teen Mummy is a time travel episode where the whole gang goes back to the 1930s and has to help Teen Mummy, and they're like, "Can we save him? Can we save him from the industrial accident that will take his life?" And they find out you can't change the past, and that they were actually there the whole time. And then they come back to the present. Teen Mummy's like, "Wait, I remember you. Like, I remember we met, back when I was a kid." Yeah, like
a lot of stuff just started making sense to me now that didn't before.
Yeah.
No, that's great. It definitely seems like we've hit a point where we care more about Teen Mummy than any of the other characters that we're supposed to be making this show about. But that'll happen. We got to pick our faves, and that makes them the natural choice for the spinoff.
Okay,
eventually.
here's to give Boof her due. Boof's problem is that she becomes a vampire, and everyone's getting older, and she's not, and she has to stay in high school as everyone else is aging and going to college. I guess like she can still go to college. I guess it wouldn't really be noticeable enough in those first couple years.
No, but we could play this sort of anxiety like Superboy has in Young Justice, where it's like, well, all my friends are growing up.
Yeah.
And I'm getting more mature, but also like they're all gonna die eventually.
I'm gonna have to
still be here.
Except for Teen Mummy.
And maybe Boof, because Boof was such an activist person, maybe she had like political ambition that being a vampire and never aging kind of ruined.
Yeah.
So she has to.
It's hard to campaign
to terms with that.
Yeah, it's hard to hit the campaign trail and press the flesh when you can't be in daylight.
Well, and also she like now knows she's going to be present for the entire collapse, right? Like if she's someone who's like worried about like climate change and like, like she's like, I'm going to have to, like, I need to, maybe it like motivates her more because she's like, I don't want to be the last person on Earth in 100 years when we're under the ocean, like.
Right. But the anxiety that we all already have about seeing like the beginning of the end is like, no, I'm going to see the end of the end unless we do something right now.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I'm in on Boof. I mean, honestly, the person we've made the least interesting so far is Scott, our Teen Wolf.
Yeah. Well, Scott's on the run. Scott, I think Scott almost doesn't need to be more interesting, I feel like, because he's going to be the hero, right?
Sure,
like,
but we also want to, since we're evoking her name a lot, we do want to avoid Buffy syndrome, which is that being the main character on the show gives you the burden of like having to do so much plot advancement that you don't get the same amount of development as other characters.
Yeah, I mean, Buffy is sort of famously the least interesting character in Buffy, but then everyone still loves the show. So like, it's maybe okay if your center isn't as interesting as your center kind of plays the straight man to all the wacky side characters.
Yeah. I think it ends up working. And of course, we do have the drama of him and his dad. At some point in those 10 seasons, we're going to kill the dad, right? The dad's going to get caught between him and Prodigium. He's going to blame himself. And then he has to become man wolf. He has to grow up.
Well, then he's also going to be like, if Teen Mummy came back, can I get Dad Mummy?
True.
And then learn why that's a bad idea. I mean, that's just a direct plot line from Buffy, but I think we can do it too.
It's been 20 years. We'll get away with it.
It becomes we do our Pet Cemetery episode with his dad. I also think here's my last idea, which is in the 1985 Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox. Some people think that this is the wolf metaphor. There is a gay metaphor, which I didn't read it very strongly because I don't know if the movie thought anything into it. But there is a scene where him and Styles use the F slur pretty liberally, and because Styles is like, you're not going to tell me that you're a I don't want to say.
To answer your question, no, I don't think we keep this scene for the TV show.
I was going to say we open with this scene. No, I was going to say, what if we think we're doing a will they, won't they with Boof for like the first half of the season, and then we pivot and Styles and Scott hook up, and they're our central couple.
All right, that works.
Yeah.
It also gives Styles like something to do, because we haven't talked about him very much either.
Styles, I assume in like season 8 will become some kind of monster. Didn't they do that with Xander eventually? I don't remember.
No, Xander never gets powers. He becomes Nick Fury.
Oh yeah.
They kind of never quite figured out what to do with Xander.
You know what we do? Styles and Scott in season 5 break up, and Styles goes to work for Prodigium and is like, I know who the Teen Wolf is. I know his secret identity. I know where we can find him.
It can be a really messy breakup, and he kind of gets to be an antagonist for a while, and then maybe we play with the idea for a period of time where like maybe he's actually a sleeper agent, or like a spy, I should say.
And in the end, Boof and Scott get together because he is bisexual, and so we can sort of play with a love triangle aspect.
This is also a way you could bring in his cheerleader ex-girlfriend, because it's like maybe they drifted apart because he thought she'll never accept me if I'm not this like perfect basketball star. But then when he starts dating, Styles,
like Julia Stiles.
Great. When he starts dating Styles, she can be like, oh, thank God, I'm gay too. Like, I thought I was trying to hide it from you. And that can be a way to bring her in.
And then in season 6, we go Riverdale and they have a polycule, and it all, that's...
Oh, you don't go full Riverdale until there's just inexplicably World War II happening in the modern day.
Well, we're going to go back in time to the 30s.
Who watches...
yeah.
I have a friend who watches Riverdale and occasionally reports to us like what's going on in it. And it is always... It'll be like the most bonkers shit you've ever heard, and then she'll be like, and that was half of an episode.
Yeah. I watched for about like three, maybe 4 seasons, and I hear that was only the tip of the iceberg. Apparently, there's an entire season that takes place in the 50s. I don't know. But for all the joking we're doing, we actually did like kind of plan out like a multiple seasons of this show.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential here.
A show that I would absolutely watch, by the way.
Yeah, it sounds fun. And again, gets young people into the dark universe, gives us characters to play within the movies. We don't have to like Marvel Television this and never acknowledge, these guys. We could bring in Teen Wolf, Teen Mummy, and Lady Bufula. At some point.
That's her spinoff.
Yes, yeah. Lady Bufula. We could bring them into a Dark Legion movie. We could do a young Dark Legion, That could be like the streaming movies that we do, like movie crossovers in between seasons. There's a lot of franchise potential here.
Absolutely.
So Joseph, you have blown open the door of a whole new wing of the Dark Universe. We haven't really touched the streaming side of things much, other than our last guest episode, Branson Reese pitched us an annual Abbott and Costello, type movie, bringing
with Larry David and Pete Davidson.
That brings in, yes. Branson.
Yeah, I mean, if it's written by Branson Reese and it's that concept, I'll watch it.
Yes, absolutely. And the idea is that every year they're dealing with different like Blumhouse characters. The first one is David and Davidson meet the Grabber from The Black Phone.
Yeah, and the Grabber mistakes Pete Davidson for a child and kidnaps him to his basement.
And in the basement, Chucky and Megan are down there trying to escape. Anyway.
I like this because the Grabber, like as played by the guy whose name I'm
Ethan
completely
Hawke.
blanking on at the moment. Yes, Ethan Hawke. It's a really good horror villain performance in a completely mediocre
Absolutely.
movie. The movie is kind of forgettable. He is fucking incredible.
He's
so like
iconic.
putting him in a more interesting context.
Yes, in context with Chucky and Megan and Pete Davidson and Larry David. So that kind of opened our Peacock area, because this is Universal, so all of our streaming stuff lives on Peacock. So we've got our annual Peacock David and Davidson movies, and now we have the Peacock original series Teen Wolf and its eventual spin-offs Teen Mummy and Lady Bufula. So this has really opened up our Disney Plus era of the Dark Universe.
And rather than, having like this sort of exhaustion of here's an 8-episode miniseries, here's another 8-episode miniseries, here's a bunch of these things that they're always coming out, but they don't for the most part continue. We will do the traditional broadcast model where this is just a show that's basically on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to follow them, these characters, as they grow up, and as they split off into their own stories. And yeah, I think this seems like a really fun addition to our show.
Well, and the other problem with the Disney Plus streaming model is that Kevin Feige is worn too thin, right? Or spread too thin because he's doing the movies and he's running all these TV shows. I think in order to preserve the quality of our streaming content, Dylan and I will take a step back. And Joseph, you're going to be in charge of the Dark Universe streaming world. You're going to be the Kevin Feige of the Peacock content.
It's just very ironic because when Marvel Television started doing the Netflix shows, who was in charge of those?
Who? Jeff Loeb?
Jeff Loeb.
There we go. And it all ties together.
Listen, I'm happy to take the mantle, but I would maybe say Jeff Loeb instead.
We'll get him on as an exec. He has to get an exec producer credit. He's got to get a little taste. And so, if anyone else pitches any streaming stuff, we'll make sure we get your approval, Joseph. We'll get your sign off and then add you there, get you your executive producer credit.
We hereby appoint you our streaming content czar.
Yes.
Listen, if I get a couple $1,000 an episode for anything, that's fine with me. Just put my name in the credits somewhere.
Of course, yes. And then eventually, of course, we'll do the Dark Universe Night Vale crossover, where the Black Lagoon springs up in Night Vale, and our Dark Universe gets involved. And that will be the world's first streaming series podcast crossover event. That'll be huge for Peacock, I think.
Peacock that almost had a Welcome to Night Vale TV show, and then it did not happen.
Oh, wow.
Good to know. That should have happened.
Which is a longer story that I, if anyone wants to know, the full story, I put it on the Night Vale Patreon, and I put all the details in. So if you want to know what happened there's a lot of gossipy stuff in there.
That is a perfect segue to plugs. Joseph, thank you so much for being on the show. It was honestly an honor to have you.
Yeah, it's really tremendous. Like your work is has done so much to change, I think, what the nature of the medium in which we work, and the idea of what can you do as a podcast. I'm honest, I don't think I'll be the first person to say one of the most important bodies of work in the medium of podcast.
Absolutely. And open the door for this crazy shit that we do here. Absolutely. So it was really a pleasure to have you on. Do you want to plug the Patreon, plug whatever you want to plug? I'm sure our fans are already fans of yours, but let them know where to find you.
Sure thing. Thanks so much for saying nice things. I really enjoy the show, and it's the kind of show that makes me excited about podcasting, that I can
thank you.
Just stumble on people doing a thing I would have never thought of, and there's space for them to do that. That's the thing I like in podcasting. I have a podcast called Welcome to Night Vale that people should listen to. We also, Jeffrey and I, who created Welcome to Night Vale, also created a Audible show called Unlicensed.
Yes.
That is an LA detective story. The first season came out last year. I don't think they still haven't told us if we're allowed to announce this. There will be more seasons. We're working on it.
Great.
I really, really like Unlicensed, so I know it's behind the Audible paywall, but just get the 2 weeks free and listen to it because it's really good. And then I have a bunch of books. Some of them are Night Vale. I wrote a memoir with my wife about the first 10 years of our relationship, told without consulting each other. So it's just a year by year, our entirely different memories of what happened that year.
That's incredible.
And I wrote a middle grade novel about Halloween called The Halloween Moon. So those are all wherever you get books.
Please check those out if you haven't already. And of course, stay tuned here on Are You Afraid of the Dark Universe? In 2 weeks, we will be back with a very relevant pitch. I will be finally pitching a Native American werewolf in Paris, our third
canonical phase 3 film.
Yes, and also our third werewolf movie in the Dark Universe, and the first movie in our House of Frankenstein duology, where whatever I write, Dylan will have to follow up on in his Hunchback of Notre Dame pitch that will take place at the same time as my werewolf movie.
Yeah, I'm hotly anticipating Native American Werewolf in Paris because I can't start writing my next script until I've heard it.
And I'm going to be throwing some curveballs at you, so...
I deserve it. Honestly, after Heaven's Gate, I deserve it.
Brace yourself for that. As always, you can find us at patreon.com/Dylan and Dalton and all the socials at Dark Universe Pod. Thank you again, Joseph. This was an absolute pleasure. I can't wait for all this money we're going to make in streaming residuals, especially now that the strikes are over and those have been negotiated to higher rates. It's going to be truly wonderful to let Teen Wolf run.
It's what we're all here for in the arts.
Yes.
Is the amount of money that we all can make in that field.
That's what we do these shared universes for, right? Is to make that universal line go up.
And hey, if it's not looking, if the dailies aren't looking good, we'll just shelve it for a tax write-off. So
yeah,
it's all good.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks. And until then,
Stay afraid of the dark universe.